They all thought Billy was done. Shackled, dirty, bruised from the ride, he looked like every other outlaw that had passed through Bitter Creek. The judge, a tall man with slick hair and a silver pocket watch, sat high above in the wooden courthouse, smirking like he already knew the ending. That day, the room was packed. Folks had heard Billy the Kid was finally caught and were itching to watch him fall. But Billy, even with chains on his wrists, stood taller than the rest. The judge cleared his throat and said, "Billy, you've caused more trouble than any boy I've seen. It's time someone teaches you a lesson." Billy didn't speak. Not yet. He just stared at the judge's watch, ticking loudly in the quiet room, and smiled. Not a friendly smile, but one that made a few folks shift in their seats. What the crowd didn't know was this. Billy wasn't just on trial. He had come with a plan that would tear open the lies hiding behind that silver pocket watch. And once it started, there'd be no stopping it. Billy didn't flinch when they read the charges: robbery, escaping jail, shooting a deputy. The words echoed through the courtroom like drum beats, heavy and final. The judge leaned forward and said, "You're lucky I'm giving you a trial, boy. If it were up to the folks out there, you'd already be swinging from a rope." The crowd laughed. Some spat on the floor. But Billy's eyes stayed locked on the judge, calm like a storm waiting. Then the judge pulled out a folded paper, waved it high, and said, "This here's your sentence. 20 years in a dark cell where no one will remember your name." That's when Billy spoke, his voice clear and low, slicing through the noise. "Funny thing, Judge," he said, "that same paper you're holding? I saw one just like it. In your drawer, next to a bag of gold coins from the Delaney Ranch." The courtroom froze. The judge's hand tightened. Billy tilted his head, still smiling. Ain't it strange how fast a sentence gets written when someone's been paid to write it? The crowd didn't breathe. Not a whisper, not a cough, just the weight of Billy's words hanging heavy in the dusty air. The judge's face twitched just for a second, like a snake caught in the open. "That's a lie," he barked, slamming his gavel down so hard it cracked. But Billy didn't back down. He stepped forward, chains clinking, calm as ever. "Then let's ask the clerk," he said, nodding toward the skinny man shaking by the corner of the room. "He's the one who wrote the receipt. He saw the coins. He knows where they came from." The judge's eyes darted, sharp and fast. "Bailiff," he shouted, "remove the prisoner." But it was too late. The people in the room, farmers, ranchers, widows who'd lost sons to crooked lawmen, they were starting to murmur. One by one, heads turned to the clerk. The clerk swallowed hard. His hands trembled. He wouldn't look up. And Billy just stood there, watching the cracks spread not on the bench, but in the judge's power. The silence grew louder. The clerk's breath hitched, his lips twitching like he wanted to speak, but couldn't. Then, all at once, he dropped the ledger he was holding. It hit the floor with a loud thud that echoed through the courtroom like a shot. "It's true," he muttered, barely above a whisper. "I saw it. The judge, he took the money." Gasps swept through the crowd. Someone dropped their hat. A woman covered her mouth. And the judge, he froze, his eyes wide, skin pale, like the ground just gave out beneath him. Billy tilted his head, that half-smile curling again, like a wolf knowing the wind had shifted. "Ain't no worse feeling," he said, "than getting sentenced by a man more guilty than you." The sheriff by the door took a slow step forward. "Judge," he said, voice low and steady, "you best come with me." The gavel that had ruled this town with fear lay cracked and useless. And for the first time, Billy wasn't the one on trial. Billy didn't move. He just stood there, hat low over his eyes, watching the judge like a mountain watches a storm roll in. The sheriff hesitated, waiting for the judge to get up. But the old man just sat there, frozen like a statue carved from shame. His hands trembled. "You gonna walk out?" Billy finally said, voice calm like still water before it turns to flood. "Or you want me to drag you out?" The judge slowly rose, legs weak, face wet with sweat. He looked smaller now, like the weight of every bribe, every lie, every name he buried had finally settled on his shoulders. As he passed Billy, he didn't dare make eye contact. Billy leaned in, just enough so only the judge could hear. "I count the days you stole from me. Every single one." The judge flinched. The sheriff grabbed his arm and led him out the front doors, where the whole town had gathered. They didn't cheer. They didn't clap. They just watched, silent, like they were witnessing the end of something rotten. And maybe they were. Billy stepped out next, slow and steady, like a man walking away from a fire he didn't start, but damn sure finished. A little boy stepped forward from the crowd, holding a toy gun carved from wood. He looked up at Billy with wide eyes and asked, "Did you really shoot all those bad men?" Billy looked down, didn't smile, didn't frown either. "Only the ones who needed shootin'," he said, plain and true. The boy nodded, like that made perfect sense. Behind him, a woman grabbed his shoulders and pulled him back, whispering something about keeping quiet. Billy's eyes scanned the townsfolk. Faces he remembered, some who had looked away when he was chained in that courtroom. Some who had whispered behind closed doors when the judge made his dirty deals. They weren't cheering now, but they weren't hiding either. One by one, heads began to lower. Not in shame, just in understanding. Billy wasn't the monster they were told he was. He wasn't the saint either. He was the storm that rolled in when justice failed. And in that moment, every single person in that town knew this wasn't the end of Billy the Kid. It was just another page. The next morning, the town woke up to silence. No gunshots, no gallows, no shouting in the streets. Just the wind pushing dust across Main Street like nothing had ever happened. But inside the saloon, folks gathered in tight whispers. The judge's fancy desk had been flipped, papers scattered, and a single bullet hole in the wall behind his chair. Billy was gone, of course. No one saw him ride out, but they all knew he had. Sheriff Daniels found a note nailed to the jail door. It wasn't signed, but everyone knew who wrote it. It said, "If justice don't live in this town, I will." The preacher read it out loud in church that Sunday, voice shaking, because he'd sat beside the judge too many times. Nobody said, "Amen." Nobody looked up. Just silence, heavy like the heat before a storm. And somewhere out in the desert, Billy rode alone, the dust behind him erasing his tracks. Billy didn't ride far, just far enough to see the town shrink in the distance like a bad memory. He set up camp by a dry creek bed, the kind that only saw water when the skies were angry. He wasn't hiding. He was waiting. Waiting for the right time to do what the law wouldn't. That night, as the fire cracked low and his horse chewed quietly on dry grass, Billy sat still, cleaning his gun slow, like he had all the time in the world. He wasn't angry, not the way folks get when someone steals their money or steps on their boots. His anger was colder, like ice in the belly, the kind that doesn't shout, the kind that waits. Because Billy knew what nobody else dared say. The judge hadn't just taken bribes, he'd sold people. Honest people, poor people, families. And now Billy had a list, names, places. He wasn't riding for revenge. He was riding for balance. And he wasn't done, not even close. By morning, Billy was already in the saddle, eyes sharp, jaw set. He rode east toward a ranch owned by a man named Turner Shaw, one of the names tied to the judge's dirty money. Folks in town whispered that Shaw paid the judge to lock up ranch hands who asked for fair wages. Those men disappeared into prison, and their families starved. Billy didn't need proof. He trusted the look in a hungry child's eyes more than any paper or preacher. He arrived just before noon. Shaw was out front, barking orders, his belly too round for his belt, his face too proud for his own good. Billy didn't waste time. He dismounted slow, walked straight up the path, and called the man's name like he was greeting an old friend. Shaw turned, smirked, then went pale. Billy's gun was already out. "Remember me?" Billy asked, voice calm, but not kind. Shaw stuttered something about not wanting trouble. Billy stepped closer. "You paid for blood, so now blood's the debt." There were workers nearby, watching in silence, frozen like statues. No one moved. No one spoke. Billy didn't shoot him. Not yet. He wanted Shaw to see what it felt like to stand in front of the law when the law wasn't crooked. Shaw tried to back away, but his boots slipped on the dusty porch. Billy grabbed him by the collar and pulled him close, his eyes inches from Shaw's. "You paid a man to ruin lives," Billy said, quiet but heavy. "You think gold can cover that kind of sin?" Shaw was sweating now, hands shaking. "Please," he whispered. "I've got a family." Billy's face didn't change. "So did the men you had locked up. So did the boy who watched his daddy dragged away in chains." Billy threw Shaw down hard, letting him hit the ground like the coward he was. Then he turned to the ranch hands watching nearby. "Y'all ever ask for fair pay?" One of the men, older, with gray in his beard, nodded. "We tried. He threatened our kin, said the judge would make sure we disappeared too." Billy looked back at Shaw. Not anymore. He tossed the man a leather bag, stolen bribe money. "Divide it. Start fresh. If he ever threatens you again, you send word. I'll come back." Then Billy got on his horse, didn't look back, and rode for the town where the judge wore his robe like a king wears a crown. The reckoning was only getting started. The ride to the courthouse was quiet, but Billy's mind wasn't. He kept thinking about the faces, men scared silent, families torn apart, all because one judge got paid to pretend justice didn't matter. As the town came into view, the sun was starting to set behind the hills, casting long shadows across the dirt streets. Billy didn't slow down. His horse kicked up a cloud of dust as he rode straight to the front steps of the courthouse. People turned their heads. Kids stopped playing. Women carrying baskets froze mid-step. Everyone knew something was about to happen, and when Billy tied his horse and walked up those steps, gun at his side, no one dared move. Inside, Judge Horace Blanchard was holding court like it was theater. His robe was spotless, his voice loud and smug. A man stood shaking before him, clearly poor, clearly afraid, and the judge was mid-sentence when the doors slammed open. Every head turned. Billy stepped in, calm as a whisper, but sharp as a knife. "Sorry to interrupt, Your Honor," he said, voice steady. "But I think court's about to be adjourned for good." The judge stood frozen for a second, and then slowly reached for the gavel. Billy didn't blink. "Try it," he said, and the whole room held its breath. Judge Blanchard's hand hovered over the gavel, fingers twitching like they couldn't decide between power and fear. Billy took another step forward, the sound of his boots echoing off the courtroom walls. "You remember me, Judge?" he asked, eyes locked on the man in the black robe. "Or do all the boys you sell off to prison start looking the same?" The judge's face twitched. He tried to play it cool, clearing his throat. "This is a court of law, son. You're out of line." Billy smiled without warmth. "Law? You mean the kind that comes with envelopes full of cash, the kind that turns lies into life sentences?" A murmur ran through the courtroom. Folks were glued to their seats, watching something they'd only dared whisper about finally unfold right in front of them. Blanchard's voice cracked as he said, "You've got no proof." Billy reached into his coat and pulled out a thin envelope. He dropped it on the table in front of the judge like it was a hammer. "This says different. Letters from the sheriff, records from your banker, names, dates, payments. You put me away because I didn't pay. But I kept the receipts." The judge's eyes scanned the papers, and his face turned pale. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The truth was heavier than any sentence he'd ever handed down. And Billy wasn't done yet. Billy leaned in closer, his voice low but sharp like a knife pressed to the skin. "You thought I'd stay locked up forever, didn't you? Just another name crossed out. But I walked out of that cell with something stronger than hate. I walked out with a purpose." Judge Blanchard was frozen, eyes darting to the papers again, then to the crowd. The townsfolk sat in dead silence, watching their mighty judge shrink before the same outlaw he once called a lost cause. Billy's boots scraped against the floor as he paced slowly in front of the bench. "You sentenced poor folks for things they didn't do. You took bribes from ranchers, bankers, anyone with gold to spare. You called it justice." He stopped and pointed at the judge. "You sold justice, and now I'm here to collect what's owed." A man in the front row, a quiet farmer who once lost his land after a crooked ruling, nodded, tears in his eyes. More people began to murmur, voices rising not in panic, but in something new. Recognition. Blanchard tried to stand, to regain control, but his knees buckled. Billy didn't move. He just watched. And behind him, the weight of every ruined life the judge ever touched was starting to rise like a storm ready to break. The judge slumped back in his seat, trying to breathe steady, but the walls felt smaller now, like the truth was closing in. Billy didn't yell. He didn't need to. Every word hit like a hammer. "You remember Miguel Vargas? The boy you locked up for stealing bread?" Billy took a step closer. "He died in that jail, starved to death, all 'cause you needed to show the mayor you were tough on crime." The judge shook his head, muttering something nobody could understand. "And what about Ellie Harper?" Billy said, louder now. "You let the banker take her land when her husband passed, even though she had all the papers. You got yourself a new wagon that week, real shiny." A gasp came from the back of the room. Ellie was there. Old now, eyes cloudy, but standing. She didn't speak, just raised her hand slightly. The weight of her silence was louder than words. Billy turned to the crowd. "You all let this man rule your lives with a crooked smile and a full pocket. And now, you see him for what he is." He looked back at the judge, cold and steady. "A thief in a robe." Blanchard's face was pale as bone. The room was no longer his courtroom. It was Billy's now. And justice was finally walking in boots. Billy didn't break his stare. The judge, once so sure, now looked like a scared dog backed into a corner. "I came here for one reason," Billy said, voice calm but sharp like broken glass. "Not to kill, not to rob, but to balance the scales." He pulled something from his coat, a small black book, weathered and torn. "This here's a list. Names, dates, amounts. Every bribe you took, every lie you told with that gavel in your hand." Murmurs rippled through the room like a gust of wind before a storm. Some folks looked ashamed, others angry, a few just stunned. Billy flipped the book open and read aloud. "July 3rd, $200 from Mr. Fallon. In exchange, you dropped the charges on his son. The boy hit a man with his wagon, broke his spine, no jail time." A woman near the front covered her mouth. That was her brother. Billy didn't stop. "October 11th, 150 from Sheriff Kane. In return, you looked the other way while he beat a drunk half to death in his cell." Kane wasn't there, but his deputies were. They shifted in their boots, eyes down. Billy snapped the book shut. "You remember all that, Judge? Or is your memory as crooked as your spine?" Blanchard tried to speak, But no sound came. The weight of his deeds was louder than any excuse. Billy stepped closer, his boots thudding heavy on the wooden floor. The sound echoed through the courtroom like a warning bell. "This town trusted you," he said, voice low but sharp. "They brought you their problems, their hopes, their pain. And what did you do? You sold them out. Every coin you took was a piece of someone's life." Blanchard's hands were shaking now, gripping the edge of the bench like it could save him. Billy reached into his coat again, pulled out a small cloth bag, and dropped it on the judge's desk. The sound of silver coins spilling out rang out like thunder. "That's what your justice costs, huh? 30 pieces of silver, just like Judas." Gasps filled the room. A woman near the back crossed herself. Billy wasn't done. He leaned in, close enough for the judge to feel his breath. "You sentenced me for stealing food when I was 13. You called me a menace, a danger. But you've stolen years from good folks just to line your pockets. Who's the real criminal here, Judge?" Blanchard looked like he might faint. His face had gone pale, his lips trembling. But Billy didn't stop. Not yet. Billy turned to the crowd, his voice rising just enough for every soul in that courtroom to hear. "How many of you lost something because of this man? A brother sent away for nothing? A farm taken? A fine you couldn't pay?" Faces in the room shifted. Some looked down, ashamed. Others nodded, silent anger building. An old man near the front wiped a tear from his eye. Billy pointed to him. "You, what did he take from you?" The old man stood up slow, his voice rough. "My grandson, thrown in jail for touching an apple he hadn't even bit yet. He was 12. The crowd murmured louder now. Billy looked back at the judge. "You hear that? That's the sound of your power cracking." He picked up the judge's gavel, heavy and polished. "You use this to break people." Then he slammed it down hard on the bench. "Now we break you." The judge tried to speak, but his voice came out small, like a boy caught stealing. "I only followed the law," he whispered. Billy stepped closer, his eyes cold. "No, you followed the money." He reached into his coat and pulled out a thick envelope. He opened it and dumped the contents on the judge's desk, stack after stack of dollar bills, stained and folded. "This came from Mr. Rayburn. He gave it to you the night before you sentenced me. Said it was for a favor. That favor almost cost me my life." The judge's hands trembled. The room had fallen silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy, like a storm about to hit. Billy leaned in so close the judge could smell the dust on his clothes. "You thought I'd run. You thought I'd hide. But I don't hide. I come back." Then Billy turned to the crowd again. "And now y'all know. He ain't a judge. He's just a thief in a black robe." The people in the courtroom didn't say a word. Some looked at the judge. Some looked at Billy. A few looked down at their boots, not sure what to do or think. The judge sat frozen, his face pale, sweat dripping down his neck. Billy took a slow step back, his hand still resting near his gun. "I didn't come here for blood," he said, his voice steady, calm. "I came for the truth, and now y'all heard it with your own ears." An old man in the back of the room finally spoke. "He sent my boy away for 10 years, over a broken window." Another voice, this time a woman. "My husband lost his land because this judge said he owed taxes he never did." The room began to shift. People were waking up. One by one they started standing, not to fight Billy, not to protect the judge, but to face the truth together. The judge looked around searching for someone, anyone, to defend him, but no one moved. Even the sheriff, who had once backed every word the judge said, stepped back into the shadows. Billy walked slowly to the front of the room, picked up the same gavel the judge had slammed down just days before, and held it in his hand like it was made of fire. "This thing right here," he said, lifting it, was used to crush people. Poor folks, honest folks, folks like me. He placed the gavel down gently on the bench. But not anymore. Then he turned and walked toward the door. No threats, no guns drawn, just a silence so heavy it felt like thunder. And as Billy stepped into the sunlight, the whole town followed him with their eyes, finally realizing justice didn't always wear a robe. Outside the courthouse, Billy didn't say a word. He just kept walking, boots kicking up dust with every step. Folks slowly poured out behind him, unsure what to do next. No one had ever stood up to the judge before, much less lived to talk about it. An old rancher took off his hat as Billy passed, not out of fear, but respect. A young girl clutched her mother's hand and whispered, "Mama, was that the bad man?" Her mother looked at Billy, then down at her daughter. "No, sweetheart," she said. "That was the man who made the bad man answer." Billy didn't turn around. He didn't need applause or praise. What he wanted, what he always wanted, was to make sure the ones in power couldn't keep crushing the little people. And that day, he did. But deep down, he knew it wasn't over. Not yet. Billy walked through the town like a storm had just passed. Storefronts were quiet, windows barely cracked open. Folks peeked out, unsure if it was safe to come back to life after what they just witnessed. At the edge of the street, a boy no older than 10 ran up to Billy and handed him a worn-out bandana. "For the dust," the boy said, eyes wide with awe. Billy took it, tied it around his neck, and gave the boy a slow nod. He didn't smile. He rarely did. Behind him, the courthouse bell rang once, an empty, echoing sound in a town that had just seen its lies dragged into the sunlight. Billy didn't stop walking, not for the preacher, not for the sheriff, and not for the folks watching him disappear down the road. They say justice has a price. That day, Billy paid it in silence, but the judge still owed him change. Billy didn't ride out of town fast. He wanted them to see him, to remember the back of his coat, the dust on his boots, and the way the sun hit the back of his head like a halo made of fire. He wasn't just a boy with a gun anymore. He was the story they'd tell in whispers. The one who stood alone in front of a crooked judge and didn't blink. At the edge of town, near an old fence where wild roses had grown up like they didn't care about the law either, he stopped. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was the judge's order, the one that sent him to the gallows, signed with a pen soaked in lies. Billy looked at it for a second, then struck a match on the buckle of his belt. The flames caught quick. That paper burned slow. When it turned to ash in his hand, Billy whispered, "That's how you clean a name." Then he let the wind take what was left. Billy rode west with the wind at his back, but the fire in his chest still burned. The town was quiet behind him, too quiet. He knew the silence wasn't peace, it was fear. People would talk, but only behind closed doors. They'd say his name like a ghost story, like something half wanted and half dreaded. But Billy didn't care about whispers. What mattered was that the judge would never ruin another life for a bag of coins. He passed a small ranch where a boy no older than he had once been waved from the porch. Billy tipped his hat. The boy didn't know what had happened in town, but someday he'd hear. And maybe, just maybe, he'd know that justice didn't always come in a courtroom. Sometimes it came on horseback, wearing dusty boots and carrying a past too heavy for its own shadow. Billy kept riding until the sun began to dip low, painting the sky with orange and red like a dying fire. He stopped near a dry creek bed, tied his horse to a lone tree, and sat on a rock with his hat tilted forward. For a while, he just listened. To the wind, to the quiet, to the beating of his own heart slowing down. In his coat pocket, he still had the judge's golden watch. It ticked steady, like the man who once used it to count down the fates of others. Billy stared at it for a long time. Then he tossed it into the dirt. "Let time forget him," he muttered. He knew more trouble would come. There were always more men like the judge, more people who'd sell out the weak and call it law. But tonight, Billy would rest, just for a moment. The war could wait till morning. The next morning, the town woke to silence. No shouting, no boots stomping, no lawmen yelling orders. Just the sound of roosters, wind, and fear. Folks stepped out slow, eyes darting around like they were waiting for a ghost. And in a way, they were. News spread like fire through dry grass. Billy the Kid had faced the judge, right there in the courtroom. And he didn't run. He didn't hide. He made the judge beg. The same judge who used to smile while handing out death to boys barely grown. People whispered about the look in Billy's eyes, like he wasn't just a man, but something sent to remind them what justice really meant when the law got dirty. Some were scared. Others felt something different, something like hope. By noon, the town was buzzing. No one spoke too loud, but every corner store, every saloon, every porch had folks whispering the same thing. Billy had done what no one else dared. He stood up to the man who thought he owned the law, and he did it without flinching. Even old men who once cursed Billy's name sat back in their rocking chairs, nodding slow, like they finally understood why he carried that look in his eye. He didn't want glory. He wasn't chasing riches. He was making things right in the only way the West understood, face to face, gun to soul. That night, the judge's house sat dark and silent. Folks said he packed up and left without a word just after sundown. Left the robe, left the gold, left the lies behind. And Billy, he didn't throw no party, didn't brag. He rode out quiet, same way he came. But something changed in the wind after that. Men started thinking twice before cheating the poor. Sheriffs sat straighter in their chairs. Even saloon owners gave fair cards more often. It was like the whole town knew Billy's shadow still lingered, and that justice now had boots and a name. The railroad men passing through Lincoln whispered about what happened. Stories traveled faster than steam. They said a boy with eyes like wildfire made a judge vanish, with nothing but truth and a loaded stare. They said he never touched a gun that day, but still left the whole town trembling. Somewhere in New Mexico, a saloon girl told the tale like a sermon. "He didn't kill the judge," she said, pouring whiskey. "He killed the fear that let that man sit so high for so long." And folks listened, because deep down everyone had seen a judge like that, and deep down everyone hoped for a Billy. Billy didn't stick around for applause. He walked out of that courthouse slow, boots hitting the floor like a war drum. The townsfolk parted without a word, some bowing their heads, others holding back tears they didn't fully understand. Justice had come, but not from the law. It came from a boy who had nothing but courage, pain, and a sense of what was right. That day, Billy the Kid didn't become a legend because he shot someone. He became one because he stood alone and made the powerful answer for their sins. And if you're still with me, hearing this story like it was told by the fire, then you know the West wasn't just built with guns, it was built with guts. Subscribe if you believe stories like this still matter.